there's a lot.
There's a lot of people on top of this period right now.
Yeah, so probably like storylines like Harrison's guys. What's called live?
Yeah, we're live, guys.
Put in that?
You know.
Thank you. We're live. There's never a shortage of people, so.
That'd be toasty. Lots of water.
I'm driving the West Coast right after that.
Okay.
All right, good evening, everyone. At 6 p.m., I'd like to call the meeting to order. It is July 1st, 2024, and this is our workshop meeting. Marianne, can you get roll call?
Mayor Young.
Here.
Vice Mayor Sartori.
Here.
Councilmember Brandon.
Here.
Councilmember Painter.
Here.
Councilmember French.
Here.
Thank you. The first agenda item tonight is an overview and discussion regarding our property and casualty as well as our benefit and health insurance. Marlene.
Good evening, Madam Mayor, Vice Mayor, Council. Merlene Reed, Director, HR and Risk Management. We're here today to talk mostly in our capacity of the risk management and benefits and to give you a state of the insurance market. Still a lot of issues to be resolved, and I'm sure you guys are aware of what's happening in the insurance market. So last year was the first time we workshop this, and we thought it would be a good idea to do this again this year. Joining us are our brokers, and we're going to start with the insurance benefits, and we have Christian Bergstrom to address the benefits section. He's a senior benefits consultant with the Gearing Group.
Mayor, Council, Christian Bergstrom with the Gearing Group. We're going to just present the employee benefits update, and just so that you are aware, a quick overview of the program. The Village does provide a comprehensive employee benefits package. So it includes employer-paid medical, dental, vision, life insurance, and employees are also able to purchase voluntary employee-paid life insurance and long-term disability. Traditionally, the Village's plan has had less than 100 employees, and therefore your claims are blended with others to determine a premium rating. You need to have around 500 employees that would allow the Village to be looked at on its own for its own, solely used for its own renewal calculation. With the Florida Municipal Insurance Trust and other carriers, they pool claims in segments. So small groups is less than 100 for FMIT, and large group is more than 100. And in the standard market, if you were with a traditional carrier, such as Florida Blue, you would be considered a large employer because you have over 50 employees. FMIT is unique in that it only underwrites a government pool that you participate in with other cities and municipalities throughout the state. Most cities offer comparable packages, so when we look at your peers, pretty much everybody offers comparable packages, and really it's to enhance your recruitment efforts and to solidify retention of your employees. Some offer employer-paid short-term disability and long-term disability if that is something that the Village would want to consider in the future. Benefit designs vary widely amongst your peers, but generally public sector entities offer richer benefits, meaning less out-of-pocket costs for employees and their dependents. Cost sharing also varies greatly. However, a survey of municipal clients in Palm Beach County have the employer, these are the average employer contributions towards their coverage. And so the average here in Palm Beach County is about 95% for employee-only coverage, where 5 out of the 9 are at 100%, where you do offer 100% coverage for employee-only cost. All right, the health insurance market trend. So costs have escalated greatly over the course of the last 25 years. 283% have the costs gone up since 1999. In the last 5 years, costs have increased 22%. When we look at the overall average premiums for workers with family coverage. what factors health insurance trends and why do our costs go up so greatly? Well, we call it trend, and a lot of it has to do with advances in technology. We as Americans want the best for our health care and demand it, really. And so therefore, those costs are passed along to the consumer. Providers are forming groups, so you're not looking at just your one solo practitioner anymore. They're big medical groups that have been buying up practices throughout the country, and therefore they can demand higher costs. Cost shifting from when you are changing the cost shift between who is actually paying the bill. An aging population, for example, Americans, we are getting older. Government mandates, healthcare reform, and in particularly this past year, what's really driving the cost are the GLP-1s, specialty medications, gene therapy, as well as mental health. So what to expect here in 2024? So verbally, FMIT has indicated a 16% increase to the medical insurance premiums. 16% equates to approximately $316,000. Why is that? Well, claims are at 118% of premium. So your claims are at $2.23 million, while the premium that you've paid in the last 12 months is $1.89 million. So just to point out to you, in the general marketplace, under the Affordable Care Act, a desired loss ratio is 85%. So if you were in the standard market, the insurance companies would be recuperating the 18% plus the 15%, so about a 33% increase in the open market. So 16% is what we would, pretty good deal based upon your losses. But again, that's just the initial. There's some negotiating that we'll be doing and talking with your benefits committee as well. Last year, we did a market bid via a request for proposal process, and only one medical carrier submitted a proposal, and that was your prior carrier, Florida Blue. Their quote was a 41% increase, and we are not seeing any market movement for this year and don't think that there would be competitive offers based upon your claims and the ongoing claims that you have. The dental, vision, life, and disability are currently being marketed due to excessive increases from those carriers, so we will be coming back to you with the evaluations of the responses of those programs. And for that, that's the end of the employee benefits update.
Thank you. Council, any comments or questions on this portion?
I have 2 questions.
What was it, Naomi?
The first one, uncontrolled costs at 16%. That's a large number. We understand that that's the market. Is there anything that we can do towards the future to start working towards being in more control of those costs? Is it beneficial to form our own trust in the future, or is this Florida Municipal much more beneficial for the village? That's the first question if you want to.
I believe that it is beneficial for the village to participate in the Florida Municipal Insurance Trust. Because if you were in the open market, I would anticipate that the renewal that you would have today would be in excess of 30%. So they're able to actually pool the risk amongst all of their members, and that's going to help have a lower cost to you. Also, you have some very large claims activity within the group right now, and they have a different internal pooling levels that they have their own reinsurers that are reinsuring those claims for them. So it's not directly affecting the members themselves.
Thank you. And the second, is there anything we can do as a village to lower that rate, if it's any policy or actions on our own to make a more healthier pool, or is there anywhere that we can improve that there is a weakness where in the future we can possibly have a lower rate?
Of course, we always want to address wellness, and we want wellness to be at the forefront of all the employees and their family members, because obviously, if you know your numbers and you take care of yourself, you're going to have lower healthcare costs. Unfortunately, with what's going on right now with the claims activity and the large claimants, those claims were not preventable. And so, unfortunately, it's just some different types of autoimmune disorders, cancers that could not be avoided.
Thank you.
Any other council comments or questions? Just one, you said the increase is 16%, but I know you can't promise, but I know there's still time for negotiation. I mean, do you expect that 16% to go down at all? Because I know, right, we just had our first budget workshop and we budgeted at 12%, so it'd be nice to get closer to that 12 if we could. What's the expectation there?
So we will be having additional discussions with the trust, as well as we will look at the claims as they come in for June to see if they've run any better. We just don't have those numbers yet. And then we'll also be looking at different plan designs, alternatives that can lower that cost.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
And next up, we're looking at property and casualty, and we have Rami Mitchell, the senior consultant and risk services team leader.
Good evening, Mayor, Council. Rami Mitchell with the Garing Group. I'm serving on the property and casualty side this evening. Again, in a similar manner, just to provide you with kind of an insurance market update. Most of you that were on the dais last year remember that we had definitely some volatility, so I'm actually happy towards the end of the presentation to kind of talk through the fact that we won't really be experiencing that this year, aside from some factors that may influence your renewal. But for those of you that are unfamiliar with the program, and just as a reminder, the current program for the village is written through, again, the Florida Municipal Insurance Trust. It's a package program, so what it does is it combines all types of lines of coverage, so property insurance being the most expensive, obviously the most exposure to the village just with the assets that you own, all the way down to workers' compensation insurance. So the package that they offer provides quite a few coverages that are baked into those individual lines. Specifically for your property policy form, there are lots of other little coverages built into that. Things like inland marine, so equipment that the police department may have, that Parks and Rec may have, trailers, marine vehicles under a certain length. There's flood insurance and an excess provided to you, as well as some other things like business income and expense if you were unable to operate for a certain period of time. And the biggest proponent, or I guess benefit, advantage of the property policy with FMIT is that they do provide you with turnkey disaster recovery services. So they have an entity synergy that they partner with. For those of you that have not been here during a storm, it's really key to have one entity here to help adjudicate and prioritize all of the claims that you're going to have in a disruption. So that's one of the great things about having your package with the trust, is that they provide that to you at no cost, whereas in a standard market situation, you'd potentially be working with multiple different carriers to adjudicate claims for all of the assets should you experience damage. And certainly in a named storm, high intensity situation, that can become very, very cumbersome and also difficult to manage in terms of your cost outlay. So that's one of the benefits of having the property policy in that package with the FMIT. So kind of similar to what Christian shared with you on a municipal entity comparison, many public entities are with one of the 3 government trusts within the state of Florida. The Florida Municipal Insurance Trust is the larger of the 3 in terms of the overall asset value that they carry. The Preferred Governmental Insurance Trust, or PIDGET, is second to that, and then the PRM is third to that. What's important to note about these government trusts, similar to what Christian was sharing on the health insurance side, they're pooling premium amongst other like entities, so government public entities, but it is one of the only markets for guaranteed cost workers' compensation coverage, especially where public safety is a component of your workforce. So what that means is that, if a claim is experienced, the insurance pays for it first dollar. And workers' compensation insurance under statute provides 100% of medical insurance costs for medically necessary treatment, as well as indemnity benefits should you be unable to return to your capacity because of a workplace injury or illness. So that's one of the biggest things with respect to placing your coverage within a trust. There are markets that are available, outside of the trust in a standard market, but typically they want you to have a high level of retention. So if you were to self-insure that component, the minimum retention would be $350,000 per claim. So it is kind of, again, another advantage of placing your package within the trust. And since you do place so many lines with the trust, they're able to, kind of spread out and pool the premium across those, several, there's probably 5 or 6 lines baked into that package. There are some entities that do insure their property insurance via the standard market. It's called a tower program or layered. Typically, there are anywhere from 3 to 8 different underwriting carriers that participate in a piece of the business. The difference in placing your property insurance with the standard market is that you're typically looking at not covering your full total insured value, so your full value of assets. The Village, I think we're going to be somewhere close to like 36 million this year. In a standard market program, you would probably write something like $10 to $20 million on a per occurrence basis. So there is a little risk with that. And like I mentioned before, they don't necessarily bake in a lot of those coverages that come under the policy form. So they wouldn't include things like business income unless you asked for it, inland marine insurance, equipment breakdown, which is really important for some of like your water utility assets, for example. So those are things that make it kind of different, and you have to make sure that those coverages are in place in comparison with your package today if you wanted to explore that market. But like I said, it is a lot different. You're working with, again, 4 to 5 different adjusters for any one claim that happens because they all take a piece of the business. So if you wrote, let's say, $10 million, there were 4 participating, you might have one that says, I'm going to take the first $2.5 million, and then it trickles down from there. So it is different. And then those that do place their property program in the standard market, they typically have very large total insured value. So we're talking, over $100 million of TIV. A lot of them have over $1 billion in TIV, which is more attractive to that market. And what they do is they place their remaining lines either with a trust program or some other surplus line, depending on how they're funding that. So right now, the Village funds at guaranteed cost, meaning full cost is borne by the carrier, whereas some of those may be self-insuring certain things. So what to expect in 2024, like I said, this is a different conversation from last year. Thankfully, there was a huge market correction in the state of Florida, particularly for those participants in some of the government trusts because their standard rating had been below market norm. This year, just in terms of a commercial property, not necessarily indicative of the FMIT, which I'll get to, but that was forecasted anywhere at plus 10 to 25%. So certainly much less than what we saw last year. I think part of that was, we didn't have any major activity here other than a dahlia, but as you can see, that storm alone resulted in over $3.6 billion in losses. And that's the problem with, either commercial property insurance or anything where you're insuring an asset, flood coverage, et cetera. There were a record number of events last year that reached over $1 billion just here in the U.S. So what you have is you have markets that are covering all of those losses who are also purchasing insurance on the back end to help them float the boat. So thankfully, we saw a little bit of a correction there where there is a lot more capital going into the reinsurance market. So that was one of the drivers in, even having a plus 10 to 25% range, but particularly for the FMIT, their property indication is about 1 to 5% to your base rate adjustment, whereas you could see something higher in the standard market. But like I said, a lot of that was due to the reinsurance market kind of correcting itself and them being able to negotiate a great renewal with their carrier. Aside from that, inflation is high. Over the last 12-month period through December 2023, as far as the CPI was reported, it's about 19% increase in the cost of building materials. So that's kind of what's driving a lot of the conversation behind insuring property to value. The FMIT also provided indications for the remaining P&C lines. So you have general liability insurance with them, which also includes cyber liability insurance. Their range on a standard basis is about 5 to 10% adjustment to the rate. Auto liability, we actually thought this was gonna come in a lot higher this year, so they kind of leveled out at about 15%. A lot of the drivers behind this, kind of in the same vein, is you don't fix a bumper anymore for $1,000 to $2,000. There's technology within those assets, and they end up being much higher cost repairs. And then aside from that, there's a kind of this factor called social inflation. It might be something that rings a bell. They talk about it from time to time. But with that, there are consistently higher jury awards that are being awarded in the liability space. That does affect the auto liability quite a bit. The average award is somewhere around $2.5 million for 2023s, and it keeps increasing. Part of social inflation also is there is a thing going on where you have capital entering the market, but there's a lot of what's called litigation financing going on. Well, you'll have like a private equity firm come in and say, hey, listen, if you want to take this case, you as a lawyer, I'll pay you, XYZ to kind of get that going if you think this is going to be something that we can win in a court amongst your peers in a jury situation. And then they're obviously looking for a return on that. So that's kind of driving some of these higher jury awards, which is affecting the auto market, especially down here in Florida, especially in South Florida, where we have a lot of uninsured, underinsured, drivers on our roads. So that is definitely a contributor. But like I said, we expected this to be somewhere closer to 30%. So their indication is 15%. And then the workers' compensation pool, they're forecasting anywhere from 10 to 15%. Again, you're probably going to be looking at a little bit of a higher end because of the public safety component, where you have a lot more losses when you have police and fire just due to the the duties that they perform daily. So their contributor with respect to this range are their pool losses. And again, because they are insuring a lot of those entities with public safety component, or even without, on a guaranteed cost basis, it is driving them to make a little bit of an adjustment this year. So with that, this is just kind of the ranges that are the norm. What's going to end up factoring into your renewal are these things here. So there was a property asset survey performed. It did result in about an 11% increase to your total insured value. Merlene and I sat very painstakingly and made sure that that schedule was indicative of the assets that the village felt were the highest critical assets with respect to your operations, and made sure that those assets that we were insuring were the ones that we truly did want to pay premium for. So we're not insuring things that maybe we wouldn't replace right away. They're not critical assets, or they fell below a certain value just due to the way that the policy is structured. In addition to that, your payrolls are increasing. This is an old number. Marlene gave me the update today. There was a reopener in one of your contracts. So I think on average that increase, you said 5.43%. So that will impact your liability lines and your workers' compensation. But the great news on the workers' compensation is that they use what's called an experience modification factor to help underwrite the premium, because there are filed rates in Florida. So what they do is they look at how your claims performed. So we are going from a factor of 1.07 to 0.92. So we're under 100. They're paying out less claims than we are paying, or I'm sorry, yes, they're paying out less claims than they were paying in premium for the prior period. So that will help to reduce the trend increase, that 10 to 15%. So there will be some leveling. We do expect an overall package increase somewhere in the low teens, just depending on how the property shakes out with that TIV increase and what we see on the work comp. But we are marketing the program to compare package pricing, so you will have a comparable option prior to a decision being brought before you for approval. And I think that's the end of my presentation. So any questions?
Thank you. Council, questions, comments?
No, thank you.
All right. Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Rami.
Thank
Yeah, have a good evening.
Marianne, any cards on this?
No cards.
Any public comment? All right, Marlene, Rami, Christian, thank you. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
All right, next agenda item 2, continue discussion on our commercial overlay districts. Jay?
Good evening, Jay Hupch, Community Development Director. I think we're getting close to the finish line here. Just want to focus tonight on formula businesses and then also development incentives. So I'm going to break the presentation up into 2 parts, formula businesses and then development incentives. And you may even want to open public comment up after the formula businesses. I think some people are here just to talk about that topic. and then we could potentially talk about development incentives later. As you know, these are our proposed commercial overlays. There's 3 of them: Village Center, US 1, and Tequesta Drive. There's a lot of similar regulations in all 3 districts. 5% civic open space, a maximum front building setback of 20 feet, a minimum landscape buffer of 15 feet. You can encroach 4 feet in the landscape buffer with porches and architectural features. All third stories must have an additional setback between 8 and 12 feet. Parking is not permitted in the front setbacks or side setbacks, and surface parking shall be screened by buildings or landscaping from public view. And also waivers are allowed from certain site or landscape requirements in all 3. I don't know how those happen.
Whoa,
Let's hope it's not like that at all.
fancy.
Okay, so the definition of formula business is something that we've talked about. I'm going to show you a slide later that shows how a lot of other municipalities in Florida treat formula businesses. A lot of them are primarily focused on formula retail. When we first started workshopping this, I wasn't here, but I think in one of the first meetings I was at, it seemed like the board or the council was more focused on retail, and at some point healthcare, medical, dental, personal services, real estate kind of got added in there. But I think retail has kind of always been the focus. Oof. Apologies on the PowerPoint. So here's examples of formula businesses throughout Florida. I shared a few of these last time, but then we did a little bit more of a deep dive. Sanibel requires a special exception for all new formula retail. However, formula restaurants are outright prohibited in the entire city. In Anne Maria Island, which I think a lot of people know is a really quaint, great little beach town on the West Coast, all formula retail and commercial businesses are prohibited in the entire city. Palm Beach, as Mr. Bradford knows, all formula restaurants are prohibited in the entire city. Stewart requires a special exception for formula retail and restaurants in their formula business area. Holmes Beach, which is just south of Anna Maria Island, requires special exception for formula retail in their overlay. And then in Miami, the Art Deco district prohibits all formula retail and restaurants in Ocean Drive and Ocean Terrace. And then Miami Beach and Sunset Harbor, if you're familiar with that, that's kind of the western side of Miami Beach, where there's a lot of character. It's kind of a dining district. And there they have their own definition of what makes a formula business, and it's 100 businesses for it to be retail and 200 businesses for restaurants. So it's a little bit high of a definition, but they do outright prohibit those chains from coming into Sunset Harbor area. So our possible definition of formula business, if you would like to make it focus kind of on retail like a lot of other communities, would be to strike healthcare, medical, dental, personal service, and real estate services, and kind of make it focused on retail only. Another thing that's come up is kind of how that this could be potentially burdensome on property owners. We've previously extended the from 90 to 180 days for existing businesses to be replaced by the same type of formula businesses without having to get a special exception, kind of grandfathering clause. If the council would like, we could extend this to 240 days, 270, 365 days, or 180. We've heard from a few people that have said that 180 days doesn't give them enough time to get the new tenant. However, as I've pointed out to Ms. Dean or Ms. Guerin, who you'll hear from tonight, a lot of times the landlord hears about that tenant leaving well in advance of the expiration of their lease, right? So there's usually 3 month, 6 month lag time before that lease even expires for them to start finding a replacement tenant. But if you'd like, we could certainly extend that additional time. We also talked about creating an expedited review process. So when there's a tenant change out, so when it's not a new business, or not a new site plan, when it's just a tenant change out that requires a special exception for formula businesses, we could do a 30-day turnaround from the time they submit their application to the time they're in front of this board. Now, of course, that would have to be a completed application. They can't just give us chicken scratch and expect that you guys to approve it. But assuming it's a full application, 30 days. I don't know what happened to my presentation. Apologies. And then on the And then I think, you know, Jeremy and I had talked about kind of going through each overlay and you guys deciding, you know, which aspects of formula businesses and formula restaurants you like and don't like. And so Tequesta Drive overlay, there doesn't seem to be any kind of pushback on this one. Drive-throughs are prohibited, formula restaurants are prohibited, formula businesses can come forward for a special exception. In the US Highway 1 overlay, drive-throughs are permitted on the side and rear of buildings as long as they're screened from public view, and formula restaurants and formula businesses both require a special exception. In the Village Center overlay, drive-throughs are currently prohibited in the code. As we talked about the last one, we could change that to say that all new drive-throughs are prohibited. So there's some existing non-conforming or buildings that with existing drive-throughs, you know, it's hard for them to repurpose, and so we can allow those to remain as drive-throughs if you'd like. Also in Village Center, formula restaurants are prohibited, except we put a caveat in that one formula restaurant can apply for a special exception within a larger development. And then all formula businesses would require a special exception. And that's what I had on formula businesses and formula restaurants. I can go through the rest of the presentation, or if you'd like to kind of do a deep dive and dig into this, I can stop and...
I think go through the presentation and we can decide after if we want to take public comment first or if we want to do our discussion first.
Okay. So next is building height. So in the village of Tequesta, this is how we measure building height. It's from the coping of a flat roof, the average height of a building that has eaves and kind of a roof pitch, deck lines, and a mansard roof. And height will be determined by the underlying zoning district. The overlays themselves don't actually assign height to buildings. To buildings. So in the C1, it's 2 stories or 35 feet. This is the Tequesta Drive overlay. In the C2 district, it's 4 stories or 50 feet. That's in all 3 overlays. In the C3 district, 3 stories or 40 feet, which is in Tequesta Drive and Village Center. And in the MU district, it's 4 stories or 50 feet in the Village Center and US 1 overlay. Unbelievable. So one thing our code doesn't allow is architectural features above the assigned building height. So these are obviously, no one's going to come in and build, you know, these buildings that Henry Flagler built in St. Augustine in 1810, right? But it is an example of a building that could not be built in Tequesta. Both of the buildings on the left are in St. Augustine, they're next to each other. The building on the right is a popular hotel in Rosemary Beach. That tower feature would not be able to be developed or constructed because it would be above the 50-foot building height in the village. Rooftop dining, also we don't really have an allowance for rooftop dining, or if someone wanted to do a rooftop bar or lounge. So this is a Restoration Hardware in downtown West Palm Beach. As you see, the building kind of steps back, and the top floor restaurants, not very visible. Here are some rooftop dining and lounges in Miami. As you can see, they're very interesting design-wise, and you really wouldn't even be able to see them from the street. Here's a rooftop lounge at a brewery in Jacksonville. This is in 5 Points, if you're familiar with Jacksonville. And so, as you can see on the right, you really can't even see it at the street level. But on top, you've still got enough. You've got tables and you've got a bar area that's covered. So that's something that you really wouldn't be able to do in the village as our code's currently written. So the height allowances in North County are all over the place. I focus on North County just because they're nearby. You could find these in aspirational cities all over Florida and all over the country, really. But really, all the municipalities in North County have some height allowances. Of course, we're Tequesta, we're the most northern, we're a little bit more unique than everyone. But I just wanted to show how some other places do this. So in the Jupiter Inlet District, so that's the Jupiter, the dining area, Love Street, Utiki, that whole area. You can do an additional story for live-work units. You can do an additional half-story bonus if the roof line and architectural variation are appropriate. You can actually get an additional story for every square foot of one-story building space you do. I've actually done a project in Jupiter Inlet District where we did that, and it was really cool. We had like a one-story retail area, and we were able to do a third floor penthouse type area because of that, which was neat. Also in Abacoa and Jupiter, spires, bell towers, similar structures, so architectural features, maybe a maximum of 20 feet above the maximum building height. So that's not even with a waiver, that's just by right. Then you can also request a maximum of 25% increase for the use of varying assorted roof designs and styles, and that's through the site plan approval process, so their council would have to approve that. In North Palm Beach, there's in the mixed use code, which is probably a little similar to our mixed use code, you can get a waiver from the council for an additional story, and that's in a very specific part of that overlay as you get closer to the Ermine River, where there's some building height, the intercoastal, where there's a little more building height, so that part's a little bit more appropriate for that waiver. Also, by right, all buildings can have a partial story, provided it's less than 30 feet of the floor below. And then also, it specifically says you can have rooftop gardens, pools, restaurants, cocktail lounges, and then there's some stuff about screening those. And if you want to have a cocktail lounge or restaurant that's larger than 30%, you can request the waiver from that. Additional height allowances, so I mean this one's obviously very extreme in North Palm Beach and Lake Park, and the C3 Twin City Mall site, it's corner of North Lake Boulevard and US 1. For a site that's 5 acres that has 50,000 square feet of non-residential uses and a ½ acre of civic open space, buildings can be 6 stories and 75 feet, and it kind of goes up on a sliding scale as the properties get larger and more commercial space is required. But that kind of shows that you can kind of condition it, so you can put something like the provision of ½ an acre of civic open space in order to be granted some additional building height. In Lake Park and their Park Avenue downtown, so this is not US 1, this is not the Nautilus building that everyone hates. This is the Park Avenue downtown, which is a little more of a quaint area, a little more similar to kind of our mixed-use district and what we want. The town commission there may waive up to 20% increase in the height of a building that has architectural features. And Palm Beach Gardens, again back to that North Palm example, not anything similar to what we would even do here, but they do allow a workforce and an affordable housing bonus to increase their building heights between 135 feet and 180 feet. And these are usually zoning districts that are well below that in height. And they actually, in their PUD process, they allow waivers for building height through the site plan process. In Juno Beach, their council may approve an additional story. So it's the baseline is 4 stories for a mixed-use project, and that's in their commercial, general, and medical commercial zoning districts. So here's some possible height waiver language that we could do if you want to, allow some developers to have a little bit more building height. So in the waiver code, right now it says waivers cannot be used to increase the maximum building height. However, it could be conditioned to say something along the lines of, except that a development over 2 acres that creates 15% civic open space, substantial off-site improvements, or a combination of the two, may be eligible to apply for a waiver for a partial 5th story which cannot exceed 50% of the building footprint. So again, this would just be for a waiver. The waiver does not have to be granted. They would have to prove public benefit. And if you thought architecturally that it didn't look good, you could say no. So if someone came in with restoration hardware type design in West Palm Beach, you may think that's fantastic and say, okay, we can approve that. But if it was something that didn't look good, you could deny that waiver. It does not have to be granted. Additionally, if that's something you didn't want to do, if you want to allow architectural features, you could do what Jupiter did in that Abacoa area and allow spires, bell towers, similar structures to be a maximum of 20 feet above the maximum building height, or waive up to 20% increase in the height of a building for architectural features. Because right now, as the code's written, you're really pushing people to create boxy buildings. I mean, I think if you're trying to create unique design, you want to give opportunities for unique features like that spire in Rosemary Beach. So right now, as the code's written, you're likely going to see developers come in with fairly boring, boxy, flat-roofed buildings. Additional thing is that North Palm code where it explicitly says you can have rooftop gardens, pools, restaurants, or cocktail lounges up to a certain percentage of the square footage of the floor below. So then density is another thing that's come up. The village currently allows a density of 18 dwelling units per acre in the mixed use and C2 zoning districts. Property owners in the village have requested additional density or density bonuses. It's something that's come up at some previous workshops and meetings. So I'm going to give you some examples of density. So this is Central Gardens. This is in Palm Beach Gardens on Central Boulevard, right by 95. So this is 19.5 dwelling units per acre, so a little bit above what we allow. However, it's 33,939 square feet per acre, and this will be important later to remember. It's a 4-story building with a mix of 1, 2, and 3 bed units, but it's mostly 3-bedroom larger units. The next one here is the Point. So this is the one that's just south of Nextera FPL on US 1, unincorporated Palm Beach County. So it's 22 dwelling units per acre. It's only 3 stories. But this one has 26,348 square feet per acre. So it has considerably less square footage than this one, which had 33,939. But it has a higher technical density because it's got a mix of 1, 2, and 3-bedroom units, but that mix is a lot more smaller units, right? And so that's kind of just exemplifies that density doesn't always equate to the intensity or overall square footage on a site. This is another one at Atlantico at Alton. As Jeremy reminded me, I don't think we would want this built in the village, but it's just an example of what density looks like. So this is 27 dwelling units per acre. It's more similar to that other one in Gardens at 33,809 per acre. This one has a little bit more mix of 1 and 2 bedroom units. And it's all surface parking in the interior of the buildings. So density bonuses, again, all over the place, but most of the places in North County offer density bonuses of some sort. Gardens allows between 6 and 14 dwelling units an acre for workforce or affordable housing. Jupiter and all its zoning districts allows a 30% increase if 40% of the units are workforce housing. Jupiter in certain areas, Tony Penna, the Inlet Village, allows it between 31 and 100% if 50% of the units are workforce housing. Jupiter also allows 2 dwelling units an acre density bonus in its PUDs if there's public benefit. North Palm Beach in its mixed use district allows an increase from 24 dwelling units an acre to up to 36 dwelling units an acre for workforce housing. Lake Park has no criteria for theirs, but they allow density to be counted district-wide, so they actually let people kind of pull unused density from other projects and count it in their project. And like I said, there's no criteria for granting that. I guess it's the discretion of their council. And then in Juno Beach, within their PUDs, like Jupiter, they allow a density bonus. It varies by zoning district. From eyeballing it, it seemed like it was around 5, 7 extra dwelling units an acre, but that's not precise. And also that requires public benefit for that density bonus to be granted. So any increase to the number of dwelling units allowed per acre would require us to actually modify our comprehensive plan. It's a lengthy process. You have to go to the state. It takes, sometimes 3 months, 4 months. It's much faster than it used to be. I'm sure Keith can attest to that. But one way you can actually allow additional dwelling units without amending a comprehensive plan and going through that process is to allow smaller units to count as partial dwelling units for density purposes. So you would allow a 1-bedroom unit to only count as 0.5. Some places do it where a 2-bedroom counts as 0.75. This is done in other municipalities around Florida and around the country as a way to increase housing affordability. It's especially popular in California with their housing crisis that's going on. And really all we'd have to do is update the definition of dwelling unit in the zoning code to allow that way I just mentioned to count the residential density. So a way that you could potentially write this would be to, it says that waivers cannot be allowed to increase the maximum allowed density or intensity. You could say accept the development over 2 acres that creates 15% civic open space, substantial offsite improvements, or combination of the two may be eligible to apply for a waiver. to allow one-bedroom units to count as 0.5 dwelling units for density purposes. Again, if you thought that there were too many one-bedroom units or that it wasn't a good project, you could still, deny that waiver and deny the project, but it gives a developer an opportunity to come in and do that. You could also cap the number of one-bedroom units that could be counted that way, so you could cap it at 10%, 20%, or 50 units overall. So there's a lot of different ways you could do that if there was a desire to. And with that, that's the end of my presentation.
Thank you, Joe. All right, council, would you like to open a public comment first or have discussion? Keep in mind, we might have ideas and thoughts up here that the public hasn't heard yet, and if, public talks first, they can't talk after we speak, so keep that in mind. But whatever the majority of council would like to do, we can go ahead with.
I'd like to ask Jay a question before we open up for
Absolutely, okay.
public comment. So that slide you just had up, and you're talking about dwelling unit going down to a half of a unit.
Mhm.
Is that in regards to the parking that we've kind of heard rumors about, or is that counting it towards the dwelling unit instead of 18?
That'd be counting it towards the 18, not parking.
Interesting, okay.
Yeah.
That's all.
Okay.
I have one other quick question that we may not know the answer to today, but just looking at the formula retail, do we have a definition of what retail is or would be in that scenario? And if you don't right now, I know this is all hypothetical, but.
Yeah, we don't. We could when we come back again.
Okay.
We could do that. I know a few places had certain things excluded from retail, so grocery stores and certain types of retail were excluded. So if we were to focus on just retail, we could come back with what
like soft goods sales kind of stuff? And,
yeah.
okay, I got you. Would a liquor store, just out of curiosity, would that typically be classified as retail?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just okay. That's all I got. I'm just curious.
All right, so
That's
would you
good
like a
question.
council discussion first or public comment first?
I'd prefer public comment first to hear from the audience. And Jay, thank you for that presentation as well. It was a great explanation and visuals.
Other council members?
I can go either way.
I
Councilmember
was going to
Painter?
say the same thing.
Vice Mayor?
Yeah.
I typically prefer hearing public comment first, but your point that we will not be able to hear from them after is well taken. So what do you think, Rick?
Yeah, well, I think that we've heard a lot of the comments already, and I think through what we as council members have had the ability to go through since the last meeting, I think it might be nice to kind of throw out what we're thinking, and then we can kind of play defense from that point, but I would like to see what we think and just kind of put our cards on the table and see how we can do to move forward.
I agree with that.
I'm okay with that.
Okay, majority. Okay, so why don't we tackle, I do think we talk one item at a time. So you want to start with formula businesses? And then we can talk about the potential incentives after?
Mm-hmm.
All right. All right, open up the floor.
Well, since
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
I would say, can we go back? We're going to start with the first overlay? Is that what you were saying, Mayor?
Are we going?
The formula businesses.
Just formula
Okay.
businesses,
Mhm.
okay.
And then we can talk about incentives after
Okay.
that.
Well, since I kind of asked for this, the overlay process, when it first came out, I was extremely excited about it. I thought it was a great thing for the village. I thought that it will allow us to take the feedback that we as council people, through campaigning or just through open door policies that we hear about from people. And through that process and me being up here for the last 16 months, I have heard a lot from people that have a different background, different experience than me. And so my opinion has changed a little bit because I've had a lot of time to think about it. But in the Tequesta, I'll just go by the 3 overlays. In the Tequesta overlay, I like it how it's written. I could do with that. I really like no formula restaurants allowed. So formula restaurants in the Tequesta overlay, I'd like to see prohibited. Formula businesses, I'd like to see as a special use exception, but no special retail. Formula businesses would be allowed, but no special retail. Formula retail, pardon me, no formula retail in the Tequesta overlay. So no formula restaurants, no formula retail, and yes to formula business.
With special exception.
With special exception. In the village overlay, I'll come back to the village. And US 1 overlay, again, I think we should just get rid of any restrictions on the formula business. that we have formula businesses now, we have formula retail now. And that, while I don't want it to look like, this is no offense to our partners to the south, but I don't ever want to see our version of US 1, our 1.1 mile or whatever it is, look like a North Lake Boulevard or look like an Indian Town Road or something like that, a Blue Heron Boulevard, not what I'm looking for. But that's where we have it. And a lot of this, I think we need to let the free market determine what can be absorbed. And we've had talked about, well, what if another dollar store, and we have 3 of them in the village now, what if another one came in? Well, one of them is going to go out of business. And I think that's just kind of let the free market take care of that. So in the US 1 district overlay, I would have formula restaurants as a special use exception. I'd get rid of any reference to any restrictions on formula business. Back to the village overlay, I'm okay with what is presented to us in the code to, I think it was 1 formula restaurant, if it's a 2-acre parcel, I believe. I'm okay with that. Formula business, I still think that needs to be not even discussed. I think we're legislating, and I've said this for several of these discussions, I think we're legislating and regulating an issue that really hasn't been presented to us. At least it hasn't been presented to me. So I want to get rid of the formula business restriction or language or dialogue in the Tequesta, in the village overlay. I'm comfortable with the village saying formula restaurants if it's on a parcel that's greater than 2 acres. I think I'm okay with that now. I'd want to see how many parcels that we have in this overlay that are greater than 2 acres to see if there's a redevelopment, what that would look like. But getting rid of the formula business, I don't want formula retail, so get rid of formula retail. And formula business, get rid of it. So we're really just looking at formula restaurants. And I think we'll come back to incentives and waivers later.
Thank you, Vice Mayor.
I'll go next because this is really easy. And I don't want to repeat everything Rick just said, but my notes, that's exactly what I have. And I'll kind of give some explanation as to why. Agreed, a lot of time has gone by that has allowed us to think. We've been able to have a lot of conversations with people that maybe we otherwise would not have been able to. And also I would agree, like when we first started talking about this, it was exciting. It really felt like something at the time everybody uniformly wanted, and maybe that's just because we hadn't heard from everybody. That said, when we first started talking about this, I'm pretty much positive that we really started off talking about the formula restaurants. Like that was we were very protective of that. And I think it was a good suggestion. I don't even remember who made it at the time, but we were like, well, should we also consider the formula businesses? And I think at the time, maybe we didn't really understand the full impact of that. And frankly, we didn't get any pushback for months from it. So we just kind of assumed everything was okay. Obviously we know now that's not the case. So that all said, I too have kind of done a bit of a 180 on this one, but without repeating everything, I'm happy to do it. But everything Rick just said on the per overlay districts, I 100% agree with.
Thank you. Councilmember Brandon or French, anything else to add?
I think I said last time I was open to the idea if we were to remove the formula businesses or do them by special exception. I'm still open to that because we do have so many on the US 1. And I think at one meeting too, I even mentioned to some degree, we need some of them, like an Ace Hardware or a Publix, or even, I hate to say it, but Home Goods, because that brings a lot of people to the shopping centers. And I know someone that owns a hardware store in a different state. It's very hard, just the amount of overhead and whatever to that retail. So I'm open to it. Jay, you mentioned in the village overlay the possibility of having 1 formula restaurants. I'm chewing on that because that's the first time I've heard that. So I'm not saying yes or no to that. When he put it up?
It's been in
It's
there.
right here.
Yeah, it's like if it's 2 acres or more, what,
Yeah, I think it was put in like January.
newer.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just
I don't know if I fully agree with that yet. I'm thinking about that one. I'm
I
on
mean, the idea was if someone was doing a large master plan development.
But it's kind of like Vice Mayor said, like, I'd have to look real quick at the map at what is over 2 acres over there. Right? Am I reading that right?
Can you pull up the village overlay on the screen, please?
And while you're doing that, Mayor, when I say get rid of, I'm talking about the restrictions on
Yeah.
formula business, not saying I don't want formula
Yeah.
business.
I
I
know.
don't want the restrictions on
Ditto.
it.
I know. I'm
Yep, that's what I got.
trying to say that very carefully. That's right. Yeah.
Just in case you care to read it while he's pulling that up.
I mean, it's primarily, it was primarily written for the Paradise Park project, right? We knew
Yeah.
that that was gonna
I know.
redevelop, and
But that's a
My-
project solely by itself, and I've said that before, like, that's a specific project, that's not the whole overlay. So I'm just curious where we would even put one of those.
sure.
Alright, that's all. I'm good for now.
Thank you. For the retail, I still would like to see more discussion or different language. I think the $3 type stores in our village is a good example of something that I don't believe we planned for in the future, wouldn't have agreed to that structure. And maybe I need to get past just that one scenario, that one example. I don't believe that that scenario represents the charm of our village, the charm that's been there since 1957. We can still say that charm's there. I don't think it represents that. So I'm hesitant on that retail side. Professional services, I agree with everyone who's spoken so far. And with the other overlays, I agree with what the other council members have spoken so far as well.
So just to be clear, because I'm taking notes to make sure I can summarize what everyone said. You want to consider leaving retail in on which overlay district?
So it'd be the US 1 would be the only, US Highway 1 overlay, yeah, because Village Center Tequesta, it's already out, so US Highway 1.
So for US 1, you would be restaurants and retail?
Correct.
Okay, thank you for clarifying. Okay, and I will say, we had talked about removing some business services for the past several meetings. So, I came in tonight thinking that, leave Tequesta Drive as is, which it seems like the majority of us are in favor of that.
Yeah.
But you potentially want to add no retail as well to the Tequesta Drive district. Because right now, I think restaurants are completely prohibited, and then formula businesses are a special exception. But did you want to prohibit the retail too?
As we sit here, yes, I can't think of, unless somebody give me an example of a formula retail that would fit in there.
Okay, so that would be a potential change to what's written now, if the rest of council agrees. On the village, for me, on the village and US 1 overlays, I thought it'd be a good idea to reduce it to just restaurants and retail and allow everything else. So that's kind of my stance. And I do think no matter what's allowed in each overlay district, I do think we should have language, because this was kind of the original goal of the plan to begin with, was, making sure future growth and development fit from an aesthetic standpoint, architectural standpoint in the village. So I do think no matter what the district, all of them should maintain the language that all formula businesses and restaurants, whether they're a special exception prohibited or flat out allowed, that they do need to comply with the architectural considerations for the area.
Agreed.
So
I don't think we've
agree with
gotten too
that?
much pushback on those, have we? Generally,
I
over the
don't
last several
believe
months?
so. And then I do think, no matter where we land in each district, I think all of them, since staff offered it up, that we should do the expedited review if it's going into an existing tenant space and not tied with a site plan modification or site plan approval. They would get the expedited special exception use
I thought that was a great idea and solution.
in all districts, right? You guys agree with that?
I do.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is it staying at 180 days?
So the special, what you are committing to a 30-day turnaround if it's going in an existing tenant space. Can it be a different tenant? Is a different business type, or was it, yeah? Because I think the same business type was for the non-conforming thing that we pushed to 180 days. Can you just clarify what you're committing to before I commit you to it?
It's if it's the same. So if it was a restaurant replacing a restaurant, then they'd have 180 days. But if it was a restaurant replacing retail, it would not be grandfathered in under that.
Okay, for that process. And
Yeah.
then for an expedited special exception use review, that is if it's going into an existing tenant space, not tied to a special, a site plan modification or
Correct.
application. No
Correct.
matter what, even if it's a different business that's going in
Yes.
there, okay.
Yeah.
Is that clear?
Yep.
That was the 30-day.
Yeah,
Okay.
Yeah.
okay. So everyone's good with that 30-day review into an existing tenant space, okay.
But Mayor, to be clear, if we're, sounds like we're leaning towards eliminating language restricting formula business. So there'll be no timetable, no 180, 240, 270, there will be no restriction on because it's not part of the overlay. So if there's a formula business that goes out, it could stay vacant for 2 years.
If hypothetically, the USI, if we said US 1 corridor, there was no ban on formula businesses, then would any of those restrictions apply whatsoever? Yeah.
Right. Okay. So
But in like Tequesta Drive overlay, that would
Correct.
apply.
right.
Yeah.
Okay. I just want to confirm. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
That's good.
Just trying to make sure.
Yes.
No, it is going.
I don't want to, you know, where are my visuals?
Jay, bring him back up.
And then I've talked to a lot of people between our last meeting and this meeting, because we had this whole planning process that was, the community was very engaged on it. And, we had the committee that was recruiting people, we had, interviews, so it was a really engaging and open planning process. And now we're going back and changing things, which is fine, but we don't have, and we're doing our normal messaging like we do through all our platforms, but it's not above and beyond like the original planning process. So I thought it was really important to like talk to a lot of people and make sure, if we're making changes, is this the direction that the community wants to go in? And I will say the overwhelming majority of people that I talked to were in favor of council having some discretion with some formula businesses. There were very few that outright didn't want any, but most people wanted a good blend of national, chains and local businesses. And they thought that council should have discretion within reason to make sure, we maintain that good balance here. So I just wanted to throw that out there because I thought it was really important to get that community feedback, since people aren't engaged as they were during the actual planning process.
Just out of curiosity, so like, were any of those comments specific to like the Tequesta Drive overlay versus US 1?
Mhm.
Like, did certain people feel like Tequesta Drive, how we have it laid out, was good?
Yeah.
Okay.
And the US one, everyone thought it was reasonable. Yeah, well, they've always been there, so that's a good spot for them, but let's make sure, we have the right stuff coming in. That's all my comments. Any other comments on the formula businesses?
I don't know if I followed exactly where you were on each one.
Oh.
Because I think we all went through each one where we stand, unless I missed it.
No, I mean,
Okay.
Tequesta Drive, I like the way it is. If council wants to consider also totally restricting retail, the vice mayor brought up, we can consider that. The Village, I would like to do the restaurants and retail, so don't do, remove like the business services. And then for US 1, I would like to do the formula restaurants and retail and remove the business services.
That's restrict formula restaurants and retail in US 1. Or
Not restrict them, but do the special exception.
Special exception, okay.
Yeah, so Village and US 1, well, no, Village is different. Village has the formula, thank you, Jay, the formula restaurant is prohibited except if it's a 2-acre. So leave that, but then change formula business to just retail.
I understand.
And then US 1, have restaurants and retail as a special exception.
Okay.
And remove like all the business services that we've been talking about for a couple meetings now.
For what it's worth, I think that is a nice middle ground if that's where we end up, but I'm curious to see what the public has to say.
Okay, so leave it there for now, and then we can revisit after we have public comment. So let's move on to incentives. So I will open the floor to the discussion about incentives, developer incentives.
I think we all know where I sit on them.
We do.
I'm not, again, I don't dislike them, I just like to be extremely careful with them. But if we were to put any incentives or waivers in, it still needs approval by a council, correct? From whoever's sitting up here, technically.
Anything that requires a waiver has to go to be approved by council.
Okay.
Does
When you're done.
that waiver request also go through P and Z and LPA? if
It does go
necessary?
through
So it's
PZB.
going to need multiple eyes before it even gets to us. And staff has to feel comfortable moving forward with it as well, correct?
Correct.
And are we commenting on how it's currently proposed right now, or some of those examples you put up there, or just kind of generally?
Whatever you think. I mean, whatever you saw and you think you'd like to consider. What you would not like to consider.
So we're really talking waivers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, the whole point of this is to add that waiver process to all, well, we decide what districts, all of them, none of them, 2 of them.
So our kind of test would be public benefit, is that, we just have to have some kind of public benefit, in addition to meeting all the other, okay.
Well, I mean, as it's written, it said that if you have to, I mean, the way I proposed it was you have to create 15% civic open space, that's 3 times what the code requires, or substantial off-site improvements, which could be streetscaping, they could decide to bury power lines, they could, build a park, they could do a lot of different off-site improvements. Or some combination before they would even be eligible to apply for that waiver.
Okay. And that's just what you proposed on the screen, not that's made it into the proposed code language yet?
Correct, it's,
Okay.
yeah, just
All right.
for tonight.
When we have these workshops, it's an opportunity for us as a council to hear the status where everybody's at. And I say that because it is an opportunity for us to talk it out to see where we are. And we don't get to talk it out beforehand. And so I say that in that the waivers, the incentives, I think when people hear height and developer, they picture a high-rise. Or if you've ever seen pictures of Paris, you see 6-story buildings everywhere, then all of a sudden, boom, this 30-story building sticks up. And that's not, for me, that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about an ability to make a small change if needed for architecture or whatever that use may be, if it's a half a floor or a floor. And that's my understanding of our intention here as waivers, that if we are flexible in some areas and then we obtain a civic benefit, that we would hear a waiver in this manner. I do like that the language is specific, and that's what we asked for, that it's not just general language, it's very specific, so we know what we're going for. So I do like the language that was presented here with being specific and the civic open space, and my intentions would be to work with the landowner, the developer, to attain their goal with some flexibility on our part.
Thank you, Councilmember French.
The 15% recommendation that's in there now, is that the way the civic open space was originally presented, 5%, which could be part of the landscape buffer? Is this 15% still part of that 25%, or does this 15% need to be basically taking part of the property out of income producing capacity?
Yeah, I mean, the 15% would still be part of the 25% minimum landscape or minimum open space that they would have to require, but you could always change it.
Yeah, because where I'm at on waivers, or the waiver for height, if a developer or a property owner or somebody's going to come in and give us something that is to the public good, I believe, number one, it needs to be on the property itself. So to do some off-site improvements, an example was, they might just make a boulevard, if you will, on Bridge Road. I don't know if everybody benefits, in the public, has the ability to benefit from making Bridge Road nicer or more streetscaped. So I would be in favor of a waiver for height if it was 15% where it's gotta, I don't wanna say it, I don't wanna make it hurt, but they need to be taking something out of, like, we've heard discussion of a quarter acre or a half acre park on a specific parcel in the village. They can't do anything with that. They're giving up the ability, if they give us a park, they're giving up the ability to go vertical on that. And I go back to, you know, we allow 50 feet currently in mixed use, and looking at the entire overlay, not just the one specific parcel that everybody references, but looking at the entire overlay. If somebody's willing to take out, because we might have redevelopment in that overlay as well, if somebody's willing to take a portion of their project out of income producing capability for themselves, that's the only reason that I think we should be able to, that I'm comfortable with giving them from 50 to 62 feet, giving them an extra story. Because by taking that out, to talk about the elephant in the room, the 3 acre parcel for Paradise Park, they could have 4 stories, 4 stories, and 4 stories, so collectively 12. Well, if they're gonna take part of that out and give it for public benefit to a park, and we allow them 1 more story somewhere else, it's still aggregately less than what it could have been on the entire parcel. So I would be comfortable with that. We talked about a 50% use of the floor space below it. I'd like to see it be a little bit more, like 65. And where that needs to be stacked, I don't know. Because if it's going to be on a park, do we want to have that partial story overlooking the park or have it on the outside? I think that needs to come up during conceptual presentation and site plan approval. But I would be comfortable going to the 60 or 62 feet, whatever the extra story would be. But there's got to be that 15% that's taking out. They're losing something by us giving them that extra height, that extra floor. That they're losing the ability to go to vertical on that specific park, and that's kind of where I'm at on that.
Thank you, Vice Mayor.
Yeah, no, I think this is good language, Jay. I mean, I keep coming back to the fact that ultimately, this is something that council would have to approve. I'm just kind of going through the step by step. 15% civic open space. Yeah, I mean, I'm open to it, whether it's, you know, us sitting up here or future council. There's pretty objective guidelines here, and again, I think, you know, it's up to council to approve it ultimately. So whether it's this or some form of incentive or waiver language, I'm open to it. But I think this is a good start for height.
In reference to what Vice Mayor was just saying, I did speak with a developer and I did ask them, not that I would necessarily ever consider raising height, but if they ever brought something to any sitting council, I would prefer the public benefit to be on that property, like he mentioned, not necessarily undergrounding something. I would prefer the public use benefit to be there on the property if they came in ever with any kind of ask. So I do agree with you on that. But again, it goes per property, per project for me.
Yeah, I guess I'm just, so, sounds like we got at least 2 council members who maybe don't love the substantial offsite improvement language. I'm trying to think of the harm, and, you know, if we keep it in there, then it's an option.
For me, it's just long-term, the benefit use of the public. If it's a one-time fix on something, I mean, technically the village should be budgeting for those kind of things anyways.
Yeah.
So I'd like to see it be more of a long-term public benefit, long-term that they're
Like a
using.
park
Or something outside, yeah. It doesn't have to be a park, but something that's publicly accessible to the residents and not like a private club, but it's long-term. They're getting that use 10
Yeah.
years, 15 years.
So let me give my input. So I did a lot of research on, shocker, right? Development incentive programs, and traditionally and typically they are enacted to promote economic development and redevelopment, and they're usually tied to, you know, allow for affordable housing too, and they do allow for things like historic preservation and park sites, but we don't have that problem here of needing to attract economic development or redevelopment. So that's kind of my first question. Why are we adding this when traditionally they are used for those reasons and we don't have that problem? You know, this plan started to be a guideline for the village and developers to have design guidelines and some parameters as the village organically, redeveloped on its own. Nothing we were trying to promote or speed up. So, so I'm kind of like, why are we adding this when we really don't have this kind of need for economic development or redevelopment? And then, it's no secret that the, Main Street property owner has been driving this waiver process. We're only considering it because they brought it to us. And I definitely want to work with any developer here and be a part of a successful project. That's what we all should, strive for up here. But I think that, I know they have shown me their recent concept. I can only assume they showed it to us at council. And what they presented really didn't have a sense or area that really fostered like community engagement and a place of gathering. Like I didn't see that. So again, like why are we considering this with what I've seen to date just really didn't seem to have a good public benefit there. And then, another thing that I consider is say we were to allow a waiver process and something gets granted for additional height or density. We all know Live Local is hanging out there. That doesn't sunset, so that goes away if the state decides to get rid of it, right? So for all intents and purposes, it's here to stay. And, we could have, they can pull from Beach Road, so we could have 11-story buildings on US 1, basically the US 1 and the Village Overlay District. So, this is talking, and it's hypothetical, of course, but it's talking long-term down the road. Say a Live Local building or two gets built here. Say a project or two is granted for more, height or density, and then we're really, really changing the skyline and the fabric of our community long-term. And so, for me, it's like, it's very hard for me to stomach being part of someone that potentially put this process up here, and 20 years down the road, just really, change the fabric of our community. Like I said, those are unknowns, but with that state preemption with Live Local really makes me nervous of what the future could potentially look like down the road. And this would just add to it. And then, when you have future like special exceptions or waivers submitted, it's going to be easier for them to justify it's compatible with the surrounding area. So like it's very long-term thinking, but that's what, this could be the start of that. So that really concerns me. And again, I talked to a lot of people between the two meetings, and the majority are just really not in favor of additional height or density, even for a good public benefit.
Okay.
So that's my 2 cents.
Keith, can I ask a question? Mr. Davis? Keith? Hey, sorry.
Yes, sir.
Oh, sorry, quick question. And I don't know how often this comes up, so if there isn't an answer, that's fine. But have you heard of many instances where, let's say, developer 1 comes in and we grant a waiver, and developer 2 comes in asking for the identical or pretty similar waiver, and for whatever reason we don't grant it? Do we open ourselves up to litigation with something like this, or?
So we always say each property has its own unique characteristics, and the decision-making is based on that. And the other side of the equation, they always say, well, you did it before, so you should do it for me, and that's where the rub is, and yes, that's what gets litigated.
Okay. That's what I figured. Thank you.
Mayor, if I may, to address some of your comments, I understand the concern with Live Local, but Live Local wasn't done by this council, and we had nothing to do with it. We advocated against it, and if that comes up, then I hate to say shame on the state of Florida, but we can't. I don't want to. I'm not looking at this because the state of Florida has told us what we can and what we cannot approve, because that would come in if it was administrative approval to go through. So that part, to me, is I understand where you're coming from and where your heart is on that. But for me, it's like that. We didn't ask for that. We were told this is what could happen. So I'm not taking that into consideration. I have heard through 2 years of resident surveys, through talking to people, through a bond issue that failed, for whatever reason it failed, but there was discussion of using that for green space and parks, that I do believe that our community does want green space and parks. And I believe the Treasure Coast plan and what we're looking for and what residents want and why it's called Main Street is that can be the signature heartbeat of this village. And it's going to take something very special to make it that heartbeat of our village. And I think giving up green space to be a focal, when you think of amphitheaters, and we're not talking about something as large as an amphitheater, because this wouldn't fit there, but something where people can gather around when everybody can use it, not streetscaping something, or, well, everybody could use Tequesta Park, and somebody might come, a developer might say, oh, I'll go ahead and I'll redo all your baseball fields on Tequesta Park. It's, I think the green space and a variance to give them an extra 12 feet of height, because they can do something to help us develop the vision for our heartbeat of Tequesta. That's why I'm looking at it more from an overlay, not Paradise Park, because there could be, the overlay extends down to the south end of our property. That property is being demolished for perhaps redevelopment. I'm not quite sure how far north it goes. It could be done. So while it's been currently talked about right now is from the owners of a specific parcel, my comments apply to the entire overlay. And things change, ownership change, visions change a little bit. And the current owner of this property has a vision that perhaps was never even presented to us before. When you look at the historical uses of those properties, and I don't think it's a bad thing. I don't want to change our code for one person, but I think when you talk about what we're trying to develop as a business, as a community, and I said this at our last meeting, if we create tools, and a waiver is a tool, and an open space is a tool for somebody to give us what we want, they can't give us what we want if we don't offer those tools. And ultimately, we're still we need 3 out of 5 to move forward. So I understand, but I just want to make it very clear. I'm looking at this on an overlay. I'm not looking at, this is not spot zoning that we'd get sued for. This is an overlay issue. And so my comments, for the record, are based on the overlay. And I'm looking past the live local, because it's unfortunate, but the entire US 1 could be live local.
Can I clear up the live local thing? So you cannot use height or density bonuses for live local. It's only capped at the highest allowed density or height by right. So the waiver process,
Right.
they can't use that for live local. I think they put that in when they retweaked it in 2024, which we'll
No,
be
but
seeing in
live
the news.
local, they can pull from Beach Road, which is 11 stories.
Correct.
So that's what I'm saying. We could get a live local building that pulls from there, and then these other buildings. Because yes, I agree with you. If waivers don't count towards them being able to pull from that, but like I say, overall, you get an 11-story building, 2 11-story building. You have instead of a 4, you have a 5-story building. Instead of a 3, you have a 4-story building.
Sure.
You overall just start to creep up.
Sure.
So, but yes, thank you for clarifying that, and I agree.
And I guess just kind of stating the obvious here, but just another consideration is I think there's a lot of great examples of municipalities that surround us that have gotten some really awesome benefits, public benefits, through waivers. You know, and we don't have to grant them. You know, there's no one saying we have to do it, but some Palm Beach Gardens, I know, they've had some really good examples of using these to their benefit. You know, and I think, you know, it's our jobs up here to just improve our village as a whole, but also increase the amount of, you know, service and benefit to our village. And if we can get those for free, through a waiver process, then I'm all for it, with the understanding that we don't have to approve anything. We or whoever's sitting up here. So that's what I got.
Any other council comments?
No.
So for those who are in favor of incentives, where would you want to add them? The waiver incentive process.
You're speaking of in the language or in the process? To add that?
In the, what districts do you want to add it to, if you're going to do it?
Mine would be in the village overlay only. Only because we go back to the comments that have been made on a different building on US 1 and how the way it's situated, it feels like an alley. In the mixed use overlay or the village overlay, by design, the west side of that is capped at 3 stories. So I don't see it being a bunch of high. You know, most we're talking about, and under my recommendation, would be 5 stories. We're not talking about 6 or it doesn't create an alleyway effect or a New York City type effect where you feel you're doing that, because to the west of it is the tracks. To the east of it, it'd be the US 1 corridor, which is, I believe, at 40 feet, I believe. So I would say, my recommendation would be for the overlay, the village overlay only.
And all of it, or just the mixed-use zone and the village overlay?
Oh, because it goes up to US 1 now, right?
Well, you have C3 and C2. Is red C2?
Mixed use, C2,
It's
C3.
so the village overlay is the turquoise. You have mixed
Yeah.
use, C2, C3. And then,
Where's the C2 in the mixed use currently, in the village overlay?
the red,
But,
So, right.
right? Is red C2?
but it's not just,
Right there, and then a little bit down there, and then the C3 is down on the south end as well.
yeah. My recommendation would be for the entire overlay, so if it included C2 and C3, then yes.
Any other opinions on that?
Yeah,
I'm not
I
in
agree.
favor of adding it, so.
I understand. I agree, the village center overlay in its entirety.
And I am not in favor of adding it to any of them.
I would,
I think it should be built to code.
I think village center overlay, I think you could maybe even open up to US Highway 1 if you had to, but village center overlay, I think makes sense.
Okay, and then, typically too, when you're putting incentive plans together, Jay, maybe you've done a lot of this, but, you know, it's a process making sure that the incentives are meeting goals of the comp plan. I don't know, have you done that yet, compared to the comp plan to make sure any incentives we're offering are meeting comp plan goals?
I can double check on that.
And then, you know, identifying the boundaries, which we just did. You know, program target and goals, really define those. The bonuses offered, considering off-site alternatives, which it seems like those that are in favor do not want off-site alternatives. It needs to be on-site. Is that what I'm hearing?
That's my,
That's what I prefer.
that's,
And then, you know, stakeholder and community input. I do think this is worthy of getting additional community input as well. We're not gonna go through a whole nother charrette planning process, but I think this is, you know, a big deal to add it, the possibility, so there needs to be some kind of greater community input than, get the messaging out, maybe some more. We're gonna have another workshop for the incentive part only, or maybe formula, but for sure the incentive part, I think we're gonna have another workshop. And then, you know, the things with the recommendations you have now, Jay, with like the 15% civic open space. I had the same question you did, like, is it go towards the overall percentage, or is it separate? And, you know, what does 15% look like on a 2-acre or 3-acre? Can we get like an actual visual of that? Just, I think that kind of helps understand if the benefit's really worthy or not. So I think there just needs to be some more due diligence on the actual, you know, public incentives that would have to be submitted for consideration of the additional height or density. Okay.
I agree. That would be helpful to see.
I agree with everything you just said, including the additional workshop for the residents. We did the same, slow down, let the property owners have time to collect their thoughts and present multiple times, and the residents should have the same.
Okay. And then is there anything else in any of the overlay districts that is up for discussion, or was it just the adding the incentives and fine tuning the formula business and restaurant regulations?
Mayor, I
We
think
did-
there was also the density discussion as well, which you guys haven't touched on.
Oh, sorry, I was kind of mixing up height and density together. Do we want to talk about density separately?
As the incentive, or as it relates to.
Yeah, I think in my head I was kind of combining incentives as height and or density.
So
So
this
if
would
anyone
be
wants
the-
to break it up and talk about density separately, please do.
And we did confirm, yeah, that does not count, has nothing to do with parking, just density.
Correct.
So parking, would they have to, like, say you split, how would the parking be adjusted to meet our current requirements if you change the
reconsider how to handle parking for one-bedroom units.
I'm thinking, because that's where I thought it was going, because I know I've heard that there was some finagling with some parking on a future project, and knowing that would be for the overlay as a whole, I don't know if I could support that as a whole.
Sure.
Maybe a project, but not as a whole.
So just to confirm, so if the current code said that each unit is required to have 2 spaces, I don't know, is that what it said?
Correct.
Just to confirm, I think we've already said this, but the .5 dwelling unit, that would have no relationship to dropping that 2 to 1, or it would?
It would not, as of now. But that's something that if you support this, we would have to, it probably would make sense to revisit that, correct, Keith? Yeah.
Yeah, because you're gonna, if you did this, you'd have more units on the same piece of property, which
Yeah.
sort of requires a net increase in,
Parking.
that would have to be figured out for sure.
Yeah. That's what it says here. Do we need to discuss this? Shoot, I mean, we already are, but, yeah, okay. I don't know if we
Well,
just need to
I
discuss
think it'd be nice to get council's direction
Yeah.
with the majority ones. Like, are we thinking we would only like to potentially add height as a, to the waiver process, or do you want to consider density too? Or vice versa? Or both?
I think the density should not be considered at this time. I think for our small village, it's logistically too complicated right now. We already have parking issues on the current ones that meet density.
Yeah, I mean, this was definitely a little messier with the parking. That's my only, I'm not opposed to talking about it or hearing what the public or the property owners have in mind, but it definitely gets a little more complicated for somebody.
I'd like to hear more about the density. I don't necessarily have a problem with that solution for avoiding the change in the comprehensive plan, but the parking does create an issue. I've seen that in other places in Palm Beach County before, where they force down the parking. It definitely creates an issue.
I agree with Councilman French on that.
Okay, so council needs more data to decide on the density, please.
And Jay, you're, just like I said with the language, your visuals, your specific language, same thing with density or parking is appreciated. Especially with density we see, but the parking to be specific examples.
Okay, will do.
Thank you. And Mayor, I don't believe we covered the turnover, the current 180 days that we discussed when we were
Oh,
going
yes,
down the checklist.
thank you. Is that something anyone wants to change?
I mean, no. I'm okay with where it is.
I am as well.
I'd be open to if I get a ton of public feedback about it, but from what I hear so far is the 180 was okay since we increased it last time.
I think the issue, my concern would be with the formula businesses, like those that are major corporations that would be coming in, like I used a bank for an example that has been used in this instance, but if those are gonna be excluded from any type of restrictions, and I think I'm comfortable with 180 unless something else comes out of the woodwork, but.
Okay.
I'm open to increasing it as we hear more comments, see the end result of the overlays and the language.
Okay. All right, anything else before I open it for public comment? Nope. Okay. Mary Ann, you have cards?
We have Caitlin Guerin.
Good evening. Caitlin Guerin with the Gunster Law Firm on behalf of SWNC Tequesta Village. I really appreciate the additional time we were given to kind of talk through this and the opportunity to talk to each of you. And it's been great to hear Mr. Hubsch's proposals and to hear your thoughts. I'd kind of like to take a little bit of a step back and take kind of a little bit higher level view at this. I think talking about the 3 different overlays has been really important because they do affect very different areas of the community that each have their own character. The US 1 commercial, it's an existing commercial corridor. The US 1 corridor largely consists of properties that are zoned C2 commercial right now. The C2 zoning district, by the code, the intent of the C2 zoning district is to serve the community at large and provide a mixture of convenience goods and services that affects a greater variety of uses than permitted at neighborhood level. So this is different than the C1 neighborhood commercial, which is intended to serve the neighborhood community, and commercial uses in the mixed-use zoning district, which are intended to serve those residential communities. So this intentionally has been established in the C2 zoning district to serve the community at large. And that's why you see it along US 1. So the overlay, and there's been a lot of talk about the formula business and restaurant definitions and tweaking those, and I think those are all really positive steps to take for this. But looking specifically at this commercial corridor, by bringing in those types of formula uses, you're conflicting with what the intent of this commercial area is. And this is the only area that's zoned as C2 and intended for these larger uses. And so, there's a conflict with restricting these types of formula restaurants, and even if you narrow it down to formula restaurant and retail, if you look at the existing tenants out there right now, you're going to have largely non-conforming tenants if this were passed. And you're looking at uses like, I've used Three Natives as an example, started here, have franchised, and have been incredibly successful, and now will no longer be permitted. If you look at Rinaldi's, Doondogs, Sierra Chicks, PA Barbecue, not allowed to come back into the community unless you go through this use. And Mayor Young, I think you kind of hit on the heart of it a little, saying, look, people understand needing the mix, the financial feasibility of having some of these anchor tenants, but we want to see the right mix of uses. And that's kind of the heart of the issue with these formula definitions, is that we still don't know what the right mix of uses is, absent the discretion of the council on that day. So I'd like to carve out the overlays for this commercial corridor, or the formula uses. See, I've got my 3 minutes up. But my request would be to carve out the formula definitions for the commercial corridor. They're better suited for the Tequesta Drive and Village overlays.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for the extra colors.
Mary Ann, any other cards?
Yes, Mr. Tom Franco?
Thank you, Tom Franco, Perco Partners, Paradise Park. And thank you for all of this and the process that we're going through. I know it wasn't what you envisioned, but I do appreciate all of you taking the time. I want to thank Jeremy and Jay. I think you guys have done an amazing job kind of crystallizing this down to what the issues are. And I think personally, I think we're made tremendous progress tonight. So I have a couple of clarifications. So as I understand it, what you're proposing for the village overlay, retail will need a special exception. It's not prohibited, you just have to go through a special exception process to get it. Is that what you're proposing?
That's what we propose, but why don't you continue your 3 minutes and then we can answer questions
Okay,
after.
right. So, question about that. In all due respect, you said you weren't impressed with our concept plan about the public benefit. That's not fair. It's a bubble diagram. It hasn't been elaborated. Obviously, if we would, and I'm not sure we will, but if we were to ask for additional height or additional density, whatever it is, we would have a significant public benefit component as part of it. We're not there yet. It's so preliminary. So we appreciate that you've taken into consideration the extra height again. Very kind of you to recommend 60%. Whatever we would do would be something that you would never even see from the street. It would be centrally located. It would be stepped back, and it would, in all likelihood, also be a public benefit for whatever was put up there, where the public could enjoy it. So I appreciate that. But the only thing that we feel that, we'd like you to consider the density thing. I know you've kind of pushed that to the side for now. The thing that was not mentioned, and one of the things we were hoping you would take up, was some unity of control opportunity with any kind of public benefit that we create. The way your code says now, it has to be unity of title, but it used to say years ago unity of control, which allows you to have more density if you partner up with neighboring properties where they transfer their density over to our parcel. And we were hopeful that you consider that too. That's my comments.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And to answer Mr. Frankel's question, I believe council was in favor of leaving the restaurant language as is in the village overlay and then changing formula business to say just formula retail. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
Marcia?
Do you want to hear it one more time?
So formula retail, special exception.
Yes.
Yes, but formula business, yes, correct. Yeah.
Formula business good, formula retail, special exception.
Yes. Marcia?
Marcia Nielsen, 94 Beechwood Trail. So speaking, this is very mind-blowing, the whole thing. I'm really against the whole waiver thing. It's so arbitrary. You like it, you don't like it. This council likes it, everybody else hates it. It's just too arbitrary. I mean, I don't have a problem with, the height thing if you're putting a little cupola or something down there. But I don't want to see big buildings. It's not just Paradise Park, it's all the way down Dixie Highway. And supposing they decide to take the old, you've got, everything's like 3 stories all the way down Dixie Highway. Suppose they take the old post office down. I don't want a monstrosity sitting there. So, it's just not Paradise Park. And I cannot imagine a park big enough in this little tiny village that I would give up those density or that I'd give up height to any great extent.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Tom Bradford?
Good evening, Tom Bradford, 44 Chestnut Trail, Tequesta. So there are elements of your discussion tonight that I think are okay, and there are elements that I disagree with that you're talking about changing and doing. But that's not why I'm here. I think that my message to you is that it was very evident to me through Jay's comprehensive PowerPoint that wherein he showed you how other codes are written in our neighborhood, so to speak, okay? And here's my point. Tequesta has historically been against making changes in its code to keep up with the times. I'll give you 2 examples. One, when I came here, every piece of property between Old Dixie and Tequesta Drive, Old Dixie and US 1, north of Tequesta Drive, all the way to the water plant, was Zone C2. I had to pull teeth to get people to understand that that was no longer valid. They built a regional mall in Palm Beach Gardens. You weren't going to get that kind of retail in Tequesta. You got to change your code. The code is a tool, and tools change over time with technology and this, that, and the other, and you've got to be flexible. My message to you, I'll just stick with that one example, my message to you is your code has not been rewritten, and I'm not just talking about the zoning code, I'm talking about the entire code from start to finish, at least since 1986. This is unheard of. These people, your neighbors, are doing innovative things to give developers, as well as the council, flexibility to end up with an exciting and robust and different types of development. So please look at those examples that he showed you. Some were not applicable to us, many are potentially applicable to us, but we have to keep up with the times. The code needs to be changed. And now that I have 38 seconds, I'll tell you the second example. I got a homework assignment from the EAC the other day where we were supposed to identify places in the Tequesta Code where the subject of trees are located. Jay gave us one example of Atlantic Beach, all in one place. Tequesta's got tree subject matter spread throughout the code. It's crazy. So my message, please do not be afraid to change the code and update it from time to time, start to finish, Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tom.
Mr. Bradford?
Patrick Dolenzal.
Hey, good evening, Patrick Dolezal. To start off real quick, I just want to thank you, council members, because I think last time we had a very robust discussion about a number of different things. And it seems that most of you, I think all of you, have gone to the constituents of the village of Tequesta and other people and really gotten some feedback. So thank you for doing that. I mean, that really does mean a lot to the folks in the district that really want to hear that they have a voice, right? So that's important for us to see that you've done that. As I said last time, I've been doing this for 20 years, and I think from a layman's perspective, the discussion tonight is very confusing. I would make a suggestion that in the future, you separate out all three of the overlay districts and have individual discussions about those overlay districts. Density in Tequesta Drive and that overlay district is DOA, from what I understand, and I think everybody is behind that. The US 1 corridor and the discussion about national tenants, to me, we need to really have an understanding about the economics of what we're talking about here, right? If we get rid of national tenants that are the anchor to the shopping centers that we're talking about, we're going to have big holes in these shopping centers, and we could get into a situation where we have a negative along the US 1 corridor, which nobody wants to have, right? We have to have the right control between national and regional tenants and local tenants, right? Those local tenants, they can afford to be here. We had a discussion previously tonight about insurance costs, and I can tell you, you know, I have a building in Key West where the insurance costs have not tripled, but 4 and 5 times what they were before. And the only reason that a local tenant can be in that building is because we have a national tenant. So just a piece of information for you, a data point to really understand what's happening there. And then, as I said, let's separate out the overlays. The Paradise Park overlay is obviously a consuming discussion, as we have discussions about all of these overlay districts. And just my 2 cents, if we can split those up, we can have a more constructive discussion about Paradise Park as opposed to those other 2 overlay districts. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
John Islip.
Good evening, Council. I just want to express my appreciation for you extending this process and keeping an open mind and tweaking, making the changes that you are considering, and especially keeping in mind the effect of, you know, the necessity of these formula businesses to balance the commercial, you know, properties that we have in the village, not just for the property owner, but also for the residents. So, you know, they're not traveling to other towns to patronize these other businesses as well. And I believe that from what the discussion is leading in that I'm understanding that in the village overlay that the formula businesses, i.e. a bank, and specifically in my property, will still be allowed under the new overlay district. So it wouldn't apply to the time criteria of the 180 days and so forth, which I think is a good thing because, again, my property is specifically designed, the building was built with the drive-through is under the rest of the building, so it's not like it's a drive-through that I can just tear down. There's office spaces above it, so it's especially critical for me that if it's going to become an obsolete use, it's going to significantly impact any future use for the property. As to the your consideration and discussions as to waivers and incentives, you know, it doesn't really apply a lot to me. I have no intentions or visions of redeveloping my property in that. You know, can't say what is to happen 10 years down the road or anything else, but, you know, you just need to be careful about incentives and that as the most critical components, I believe, of developments are height, density, and parking, especially as it affects its continuity with adjacent properties and its impact on other adjacent properties as well. So again, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you, John.
Andrea Aiken.
Mayor, Vice Mayor, Council, thank you for being here and what you do. This is my first time, so I'm not really good at this, and I feel like what I want to say is more of a question, but I'm not really comfortable. There seems to be a lot of emphasis on US 1 and the corridor, and it feels like I'm hearing, Mr. Satori, no waivers, that we need to leave it open for formula businesses. And again, I agree, the definition of formula businesses is kind of out there and what that might mean. And that they would so openly not have the same restrictions because it's US 1, that formula restaurants or other restrictions in there doesn't seem to make sense to me. And I'd like to know how that makes sense to you for the local business owners on US 1 that are struggling and have built Tequesta and been here for a very long time. And it's not just a typical US 1, you know, you've got a lot of residential area right there too. So I'm not so easy with just sort of opening US 1 commercial corridor to formula businesses not having to have any requirements that you're putting in place for other areas of Tequesta. And again, I don't understand how you feel that serves the business owners here, the local, and the residents that are so close to there, and the residents, in keeping with the tradition of what our village is. So, hope that
Yes, thank
Thank
you.
you.
That's it. Any more cards? No. Any other public comment? Okay. All right, so council, I want to circle back and give staff direction. We're definitely going to have another workshop on incentives because we need more info. I don't know if we need a workshop formula businesses anymore, but we can if the consensus majority wants to, but I want to give staff direction on both. So focusing on the formula regulations, we all want to maintain the aesthetic considerations for all formula businesses and restaurants in all the districts, but even the ones that don't have to apply for a special exception.
Agreed.
So maintain that language in the overlay district, which is already there.
Yeah.
All right. Do the expedited 30-day special exception
Agreed.
review if it's going into an existing space and not tied to a site plan modification or site plan approval in all the districts. Give me a second, I'm going through all my notes. Jay had said add language that for the drive-throughs, add the new drive-through language. Do we want to add that? So existing drive-throughs. Can you come up to the podium and just explain that one more time?
This is for the village still?
Yeah, so in the village center overlay, I think drive-throughs are prohibited, but because there's a few existing ones there, we talked at the last meeting about adding language that said all new drive-throughs are prohibited. So the existing ones could remain and be utilized.
I would agree with that. Cause I agree, we got at least, yeah, 1, 2, at least 2, I can think of 3. Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay, so we'll say, he'll word it as such, so it just
Would that
applies
apply
for
to
new.
banks specifically, or could like a different type of business come in and use the?
Yeah, I think, because
Same
the
use.
property I brought up was the vacant
Yeah,
P&C,
P&C,
which
okay.
somebody's brought to my attention they'd like to use as a non-formula restaurant with the drive-through. But they can't, under the current code, under the proposed overlay, it does not allow a drive-through. But then somebody has to repurpose the building, and they have a building that will continue to sit vacant unless another bank comes in.
So right now, they were all existing or former banks, right?
Mhm.
All 3 of them.
Yeah.
Only one is still existing. The other 2 have been gone. So I guess, I mean, do we want to, I would be in favor of leaving it, having that language, but it has to be for the same purpose. Because
Yeah,
I do think the
yeah.
intent of this was not to have
Correct.
drive-through, like,
Restaurant that would be
restaurants
nice.
through
Yeah.
these districts.
I hate to even say the word again, but you could allow it to be a waiver for a new use to come in. So if a restaurant did come in, maybe it could be appropriate as a drive-through, with the existing one, and that can be granted through the waiver.
Stop
Or no.
saying waivers. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding.
Thank you for the option. I'd be against them.
I don't think that was the intent of what the community wanted up to Tequesta Drive, so.
I agree.
I would agree.
Okay, so leave it, it has to be the bank use.
For the record, I disagree with that, just because I think we're now restricting the use of that building to a bank, which as I said earlier, the free market will determine what can go there, and there's been nobody banging down the doors to put in a bank, so I think we're going to have, by restricting the use to the prior use, I think we're going to have a building there. It's going to sit for a while.
Just to be clear though, so if like the PNC, so what's the wine place that uses, like if someone brought it, they could still utilize the drive-through area for any. They couldn't use it to drive through.
Oh, like where Wine Proxy is in the
Correct.
art gallery?
Correct.
Yeah.
So it could
What
be
was
like
that before? I don't even remember. Was it? It had to have been.
I think it was a
had to-
bank. I
had
can't
to be a
remember.
bank.
That'd be a historical question.
Yeah,
or a
you could
Bradford
like,
question.
you could repurpose a bank drive-through into like seating for a barbecue restaurant or something.
Got it on Seabrook and.
Your gallery.
Yeah,
is where
you
we're
just
going.
couldn't use it as a drive-through for a restaurant. Is that my guess?
So, Jay, I'm sorry. Maybe you should stay on the podium.
I think the intent is we don't want to drive through like a McDonald's type drive-through
Right.
restaurant on
Yeah.
Tequesta Drive.
But if they were to utilize it, like Councilmember Painter said, to do like seating for people
Like
that
wine
complements
Like
like.
close it off.
Yeah, we could clarify that it wouldn't be like a restaurant drive-through.
Yeah, like people are repurposing service stations now and making them cool.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not it's not a drive-through.
Just want to make sure we're not,
just
because I
a-
agree, I don't want to pigeonhole that to being just a bank. I mean, the reality is somebody could buy it and knock it down if they wanted to, but if it could be used for something cooler, as long as it's not a drive-through in the sense of a car is going through it to pick up food and pay, then I think that's great.
Okay, so you can add language accordingly, and is the majority in favor? I know Vice Mayor's not.
Yes,
I am.
Councilmember Brandon?
Yes, repurposing, but not vehicles going through, much like we already have happening historically.
Okay, and then Tequesta Drive overlay, the consensus was to leave it as is, but also add, prohibit retail. That was the Vice Mayor's request.
Yeah, it was formula retail.
Well, no, this would be.
So right now, it prohibits restaurants. Everyone was in favor of leaving that. Formula business requires a special exception. Vice Mayor had brought up potentially adding retail, formula retail as being prohibited.
As an outright prohibition. Yeah, I mean, I could go either way. I know I agreed to that initially. I could go either way on that one, but I think the intent there is really to protect our local retail, so I'm okay with it, but.
Yes.
Add the prohibit the retail.
I agree as well.
Okay, got that, Jay?
Yep.
And then the village overlay. I know Vice Mayor wanted to remove formula businesses altogether. Some were okay with changing it from businesses to retail. So you would have leave the restaurants as is, that they could apply for a special exception within a 2-acre development, and then either completely remove business or change it to formula retail instead of formula business requires a special exception. So what does majority think there? I would be in favor of changing formula business to formula retail. Vice Mayor, do you have anything else to add? I feel like I'm speaking for you.
No, I don't.
Okay.
Formula business being professional services. You're switching to formula retail, as we just did.
Yeah, so the
to Tequesta
formula
Drive.
businesses, no. So the last bullet point, formula business requires special exception, change it to formula retail requires special exception. So formula businesses, like business services, they don't have to apply for they're allowed and they do not have to apply for a special exception.
So yes to that.
Yes.
That you clarified that, yes.
Do you want me to read it one more time so everyone's super clear?
So the businesses are allowed, the formula retail would need special exception.
Yes.
Okay, yes.
Yes.
Yes. Majority is yes, okay. And then US 1, we were kind of the same. Vice Mayor suggested to remove formula businesses and but leave restaurants as a special exception. And then there was a discussion of changing, just like we did for Village Overlay, change formula businesses to formula retail require special exception.
I'm okay keeping the restaurants as special exception and business and retail being permitted.
Being permitted?
Yeah.
Omitted or permitted?
Permitted. They don't have to
Without
apply for a
special
special exception.
Wow, y'all are confusing me.
Just for US 1.
Look at, okay, so look at the,
I know, it's
okay.
It's like permanent, not
So
permanent.
the second bullet
Just to make
point,
sure
we would
understand.
leave as is, formula restaurants require special exception.
Yes.
And then completely strike the last bullet point.
That's fine.
So the only formula restrictions would be restaurants would have to apply for a special
Which I
exception.
think is what the original intent, where we even started this whole thing years ago on, so I'm fine with that.
Yeah.
For US 1 overlay.
Agreed.
Wow.
Okay.
So formula, to be clear, I'm sorry, just formula businesses will be allowed, and formula retail will be allowed.
Correct.
Okay.
And
We'll
then
create a new
restaurants-
definition for formula retail, so there will be formula retail, formula businesses, and formula restaurants. Three
Right, you'd
definitions.
update that on
So
the
we'll update.
ordinance.
Yep.
Yeah, and then the formula restaurants still require a special exception.
Yep.
This overall, we're focused on the formula restaurants. Is that kind of this intention that I'm feeling?
Seems that way.
And I know we have the language down, but that's the intention of the formula. Okay.
Yeah, and I think, like you said, with the maintaining the aesthetic and architectural considerations, no
Mhm.
matter what, helps that cause and maintain, at least visually that, the character here. The Starbucks is a great example that it's not your typical looking Starbucks, right? It fits in with the village, so.
They did a good job.
Yeah, so it's kind of maintaining that. So I think that will help even for the formula businesses that don't have to submit.
And so when we leave here this evening, that we're on the same page, we're not on the same page, but we're gonna talk about density and
Incentives, basically, yeah.
Okay.
So that's really, I think, the only thing left to workshop is, yeah, on this subject matter.
Yeah, and I think, so we'll the next workshop on the 29th, we'll just focus on the density and height incentives.
Yep, I
And
got
we're not
good
talking about
feedback.
formula businesses again. I think we're all have
Unless you
set our
guys
piece, we've reached
wanna
some level
talk
of
about it.
compromise, and I think we're there.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
great.
Because for those, everyone knows, we've been working this for a long time. We just didn't start talking about this. This is a long time coming.
And if there still is any conflict out there or a lawsuit, whatever that is, please continue to keep us updated so we know how to have these discussions further.
Agreed.
Disagreements or lawsuits, either way.
Okay. Good to move on to the next item. Jay, are you clear?
I'm good, thank you very much.
Thank you. All right, the third item, discussion on Tequesta Drive, grade crossing quiet zone. Doug?
Good evening, Mayor, Village Council, Doug Chambers, Public Works Director. The reason I wanted to bring this item back to you, the council had tasked staff with moving ahead and applying for a quiet zone at Tequesta Drive crossing. And just for a quick overview, the requirements for the horn rules in the quiet zones, right? So locomotive engineers must begin to sound train horns at least 15 seconds and no more than 20 seconds in advance of the public grade crossing. So that's currently what we have there. A procedure was established to allow a public authority to establish a quiet zone. And by meeting that criteria, you have to show that by eliminating the train horn, you are adding something additionally, an additional safety feature to the crossing, to the grade crossing. Now, depending on how many crossings you have, some cities have multiple crossings, so the criteria that you have an cumulative points based on the safety features that you have at your crossing. So if you have multiple crossings, they score multiple crossings to get you to the quiet zone at multiple crossings where we only have one crossing. So back in 2016, we had the Palm Beach County Transportation Authority do an assessment of our grade crossing, and at that time, we met the criteria for a quiet zone. During the Bright Line project, We met out there again with the TPA and also the Treasure Coast Planning Council, who is working along with Brightline Project and also the TPA. We actually walked the Tequesta Drive crossing, we walked the Martin County crossing with Martin County, and we also walked the Jupiter crossing. And this was at the tail end of the Brightline project, and we received information at that time, but that we still met the criteria to apply for a quiet zone once the Brightline project concluded. However, the reason I bring this back to you today, I met with the FRA, right, the Federal Rail Administration, in April, and we went through the crossing and we went through the criteria, and we have two obstacles that are preventing us from moving ahead with the quiet zone. One of those, the crossing was built with 2 gate arms, right? So potentially somebody could drive the wrong way on Tequesta Drive, incoming traffic, and obviously get through the crossing. We do have curb medians, we do have curbs along the sides, we have sidewalk, we have gate arms on the sidewalk, but we only have 2 gate arms. So somebody could potentially get around the crossing. That's one obstacle we have. The other obstacle we have, there is a commercial driveway at 304 Tequesta Drive that is within 60 feet of the gate arm. And the requirement would be that that gate arm is 100 feet from the crossing. So we have 2 options. Number one, we could lobby to have 2 extra gate arms added at the crossing, so we'd have 4 gate arms. The manager and I are currently working with the TPA and the DOT to put additional crossing arms and signalization at the crossing. That would get us to the quiet zone. That, however, is not, we're not sure if they currently have funding to do that. That is part of the second phase of the Brightline Improvement Project, to add additional safety features throughout South Florida at different crossings. So the manager and I have applied and asked for funding to put the additional gates there. We will know within the next month or so if funding is available in this fiscal year or it's going to move to the next fiscal year. So to add the additional arms and signalization, it could be a year out or less. So in looking at that with the FRA, the other option, if you look at the screen there, that is a commercial property on the, just west of the crossing. If we were to move that commercial driveway, which shows in that picture, we moved it 40 additional feet, which gets us to the 100 feet, we would meet the criteria for a quiet zone, just by moving the one driveway. However, the impacts to moving that driveway, we have to modify the site plan. We have to apply for a site plan modification because that site doesn't currently meet the current fire code and fire access to the property. In doing that, moving that driveway, we would have to install a fire hydrant at the entrance, and we would have to expand the west side of that, the east side of that property, which would allow fire rescue to have access to a hydrant at the entrance to the facility and also provide additional access on the east side of that property. So we have a couple challenges, right, to get us to that quiet zone. My recommendation would be that we wait an additional 30 days to hear back from the DOT and to see if they're going to find the funding in this fiscal year. There are some projects that may not be moving forward. They may be able to find some additional funding to move this project ahead, and then we can get a timeline on when they could start actually the design and the construction and what that would look like, how far out we would be. To move the commercial property, the driveway, I've already spoken with the property owner who's in favor of us doing this work. He understands the need in the village. Everybody who either leases there or his wife has a business there has to listen to the train horns all day long. And so if we were to do something like this on this property, the village would pick up that cost, right? In your packet, I broke down the cost and the different items that we would have to add to this property to meet that fire code. And so relocating the driveway, the pavement extension, installing the fire hydrant, we would have to relocate the landscaping in the front to move that driveway, and also the landscaping. So when we extend that pavement to the east, that's actually village property. That's our property. So we would have to relocate that cocoa plum hedge And obviously, we install that pavement, it's on our property, we would maintain that pavement. But that would get us to, site plan approval for that modification. So, if we were to move forward with that, we're looking at a budgetary cost of $82,450. That would be the village cost. We would take on that cost. Again, the property owner's in agreement that he would sign an agreement with us to modify the site plan, but he's not going to put up the funds for that. So again, those are our two options. Other than doing either the gate arms or moving that driveway, we currently cannot apply for a quiet zone. We don't meet that criteria. And unfortunately, at some point, although I have been told this verbally or in writing, at some point with all the accidents we've seen with the Bright Line trains, that scoring criteria changed, right? That we met the criteria, now they added a second track and a second train. Nothing has changed, the parameters are the same, the requirements are the same, but the scoring has changed. And so in that second phase in South Florida, they're going to be adding additional safety features, not only, at our request in Tequesta, but throughout South Florida. So that's where we currently stand.
Okay, thank you, Doug. Council, questions, comments?
So just to make sure I follow, if we did the site work and relocated the entrance, then we do not have to do the arms. It's a one or the other, or the arms would still have to happen?
We have to do one or the other. Either move the driveway, then we meet the criteria, we score high enough to meet that requirement to apply for a quiet zone.
Okay.
The gate arms are still gonna come at some point.
Yeah.
Just right now, we don't know when that's gonna
Okay.
come. Yeah.
Is there, I hate to even ask this, but, that property owner is certainly gonna get a benefit from this. Is there any use in asking to contribute to any of the cost? Or can we ask them?
We could ask, I have not
I mean,
asked. The initial dialogue was, making some modifications to the property. Again, that whole east side is our property.
Yeah.
It's not his property. So he would have access to the village property, we'd extend that pavement. So the only modification to his property is the driveway and moving the parking spaces from where the driveway is gonna be moved and where the driveway used to be.
Yeah.
So we're gonna relocate a couple of parking spaces. And in that conversation as well, he may possibly lose 2 parking spaces, and he's okay with that. So we didn't talk about cost or anything like that. The only other way for him to meet the current code, which is not required at this time, because he's not changing the site, he could install a fire sprinkler system in the building, which would be his cost. But currently, he's good where he's at.
Okay.
So since we're so close to the other 2 crossings, do we have an update on how their applications are doing? Because didn't Jupiter apply for the one near the bridge, and they were now to do fencing and all that?
Jupiter has, they're in the process of issuing their notice of intent. Martin County is still on hold, they're still assessing it. But again, the town of Jupiter they will be scored on multiple crossings, right? So you may not see 4 crossing arms at their crossing. I think they're adding some fencing and some other safety features as well. But their scoring will be based on, it'll be accumulative based on several crossings. I don't personally agree with that. I think you should be scored the same at a crossing, whether you have 2 arms or 4 arms. I mean, if our location at Tequesta Drive requires 4 gate arms, I think every crossing should have 4 gate arms, just for safety
Yeah,
features.
I was just curious, because I know in our last discussion, we only technically have the one, but we're so close to the other one, so even if we had a quiet zone, we could still hear the other horns. And I was just curious what their process is. Obviously, we don't need excessive 1, then 2, then 3. But I was just curious where they're at in their process to see if we were gonna have any difference.
They're in the process of upgrading, and then again, Martin County's still on hold. They're sitting on it to see how it goes over the next year with any potential accidents. There is one other option that I throw out there, just so you're aware of it, and I did have this conversation with Martin County and the town of Jupiter. So you can piggyback on another city's quiet zone. So in other words, we could try to team up with the town of Jupiter, and then we would be scored based on multiple crossings, right? We could do the same thing with Martin County. With Martin County, they're not moving forward at this time with a notice of intent, so I don't know when that would happen.
They
Now, the
said
town
at
of-
least a year. Sorry to interrupt, but I remember Martin County said they were going to wait a year from what I remember, so.
Right. And they're still on hold. And then the town of Jupiter, when we did the walkthrough, they didn't necessarily want to partner with us, because what happens when you do partner or piggyback on somebody else's quiet zone, anything that happens within that jurisdiction affects your jurisdiction. So if there's an accident or something happens there, you lose your quiet zone based on multiple crossings that are outside your jurisdiction. So at that time, we didn't think that was a good plan for
And I would be
either one of us.
hesitant to piggyback them because they've had some issues and they have way
Yeah.
more crossings than we do.
But I just wanted you to be aware that
Yeah.
that is
No, I
another
agree.
option out there, but we weren't going down that path.
Doug, a question on the hedge that would have to be relocated, and thank you, Jeremy, for pulling that up. We're just granting access to the we're not giving that property to him.
Correct.
So
He will have access to it, it'll still be village property, and.
it's really gonna be access really just for, you're widening the driveway where people might enter and go south. It's just so they can get the fire rescue truck there?
It's
the pumper?
almost impossible to get around the back of that building right now.
Right, so they have
That's
to
the
widen it for
access.
that.
The access is, the entry is on Cypress,
Mhm.
and it's one way through the property. And, matter of fact, in the back there, so that's where the existing driveway is. If you go straight into the property to the back, that's where Waste Management's dumpster is. So they're pulling in and pulling back out.
Yeah.
So he could potentially move the dumpster onto the new pavement, and that would provide some more access as well for garbage pickup. So
We're
he's
not
in-
currently
he's in favor of
utilizing,
it.
we're not currently utilizing that stretch because it's a hedge. And that's such a, we've talked about this in the past, it's such a dangerous place. You know, I'm glad we created green space out of it instead of just our right of way, but,
Yeah, we would have to take that hedge out. You can't save that hedge.
Right,
so-
yeah.
But we would replant.
we would
Trees are
lose,
okay.
we would lose that by agreeing to either we pay for it or we wait. So in 30 days, we'll know if there's money from DOT for the arms, and do we know what the timeline after that would be?
Timeline is, yeah. So it's, it's not just gate arms, it's all the signalization, it's the lights, it's the horns, it's.
Or we could move forward with paying for it at $82,000.
Right.
Getting it done, and the
Yeah.
benefit of getting a quiet zone for the residents and the businesses that are on that whole stretch.
But with no real guarantee necessarily, it would just, would that guarantee us to get our application approved at this point where we are with them?
Well, either option would get us to the
So,
quiet
okay,
zone.
so if
Yeah.
we invest $82,000, if we were to invest $82,000, then we know.
Then we control it and we move,
Okay,
we move quickly.
so it's just a check of the box and.
We'd come back to you with a notice of intent through a resolution. Keith has already drafted, it's in the packet. You guys would approve the resolution, we send out our letters, and we move forward. That could take 2 to 3 months. That's a 2 to 3 month process just to get back the acceptance
Yeah.
from your notice. And then when you get that back, then we issue the notice to establish. Then I meet back out on site with the FRA, and we go over exactly what we're doing and the timeline.
Jeremy, we're in the process of budgeting and finding dollars. Is there any place, would you be comfortable if we said, let's move forward with this, even if it's the full 100% of it, because the property owner may not participate?
So this would be, this would come out of probably this year's budget, which is where we're at now, and not in the budget, but we would take it out of reserves to pay for this project, our currently reserves. And I think Doug talked on a little bit, like, my recommendation would be, let's wait 30 days, let's just at least get an answer if it's gonna be funded. Anything that we can get funded, that we don't have to use our taxpayer money. It's been a year and it hasn't been quiet. I think a couple more months are, I understand there's a desire by residents to have this quiet zone, but, I think saving $80-something thousand will go a long way if we wait 30 days, and then we'll have a lot better presentation for you about specific timelines or something like that. 'Cause I know Doug just heard back from them today about the potential timing of getting an answer for the funding that we didn't have a week ago when we put this together. So I think waiting 30 days would be the appropriate thing to do with this, but it would be an unfunded budget item that we'd have to take out of reserves.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree with the plan. Wait 30 days. If not, I would support approving the $82,000 if needed. I was shocked at the $500,000 for gate arms.
So the price
I
today
can't
is
support that.
$568,000.
But I will say that- Yeah, that's insane. But I guess I don't know the industry. Definitely need that arm. I've been first on scene for a lot of these accidents, and I didn't realize we didn't have that fourth arm as many times as I drove by.
And we'll still push for that, even so if they don't get it funded this year for us and we move forward with this version, we'll still be trying to push for the gate arms in the future to make sure that it happens for additional safety.
Jeremy, can you turn it towards the railway real quick? I just want to see that median that's there. I know I drive by this every single day. Man. Okay, I guess their point is someone could just drive over the median.
You can go up to that median
Or
and drive
come-
between
yeah, or
the two
come-
medians.
go further back.
Yeah. You can
Love
drive
it.
between the two medians.
Get
There's
sick
an
of
opening
it.
at the crossing. So.
It's usually elderly or inebriated.
Yeah, and I think Kurt can attest to, there was somebody on the other side of the gate arm one time, right? Right after the Brightline project finished, yeah. So. It
So I
can
just want,
happen.
I want to be clear, if we make these improvements, we're guaranteed to be granted the quiet zone.
That's what the FRA told me in April 2024 in all my communication. It's one or the other.
Well, things
Doug,
have changed since they first told us we met the crossing requirements, it makes me nervous.
Doug, if we agreed to do this, we were gonna put together a notice to proceed. We would give them our plans, then
Right.
they would say, yes, if you do these improvements, you will be a quiet zone, you
Right.
can
I'd
be
be
a
more
quiet zone.
comfortable with that.
And then we'll do the improvements
Yeah.
and spend the money.
Right, so
That's
then notice of intent is first.
Yeah.
That would come back to you
Okay.
first. We send that to them with the changes we're gonna make at the crossing, and then we'd get the.
I asked that question because I didn't want to spend
Because
$83,000.
it's already changed, they already told us we've met the requirements and
Yeah,
now
we
it's
look pretty,
changed, so I don't trust it.
Yeah.
And then on the fire access, so that's on our property, the proposed fire access would be on our property.
The hydrant is in the right of way, right, in the swale, in the front of the property, right? That would be on the village property, and then extending the pavement
The
is on village
proposed
property.
along the, west elevation of the building there, right?
Right, that's village
So
property.
how, I mean, we would have like an easement agreement with that property owner, who would be responsible for the maintenance of that? I mean, I know those are all things to be worked out, but do you have high level answer to that?
Yeah.
Like
It's
a
our
crossing.
property, so I would say we maintain it. I mean, if we go in that direction, that pavement is good for 25, 30 years. There's nothing
Yeah,
happens.
but it's not for our use, it's for.
It is for our use. It's our
Well,
property.
but it's for fire access for that property,
Correct.
right, so
Yeah,
it's
that's the main intent.
technically not for, I hear
Yeah,
what
we're
you're
not gonna
saying.
be storing items on there and, I mean, it's really for fire access, so we can, for site plan.
Okay, so whatever agreements struck with the property owner, like, it'll be clear they can't use it or store stuff on it or anything like that? Or how is that gonna work? Cause it's, the fire access is for their property, right? But it's on our property.
It's on our property, but they will use it for access to drive on to go around the property. They're not gonna use it for parking, but they will take the dumpster that's on the very edge of their property and slide it over onto that pavement, so waste management can come in and out and more easily pick up.
So I guess I guess is that gonna be clear in the agreement what they can and can't use it for? I mean, just wanna make sure we're,
That's why we have key.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Work through all those details if that's the direction.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if we want to put some language in there that he has to maintain it, we can put that in there too. Now, I don't know if he'll necessarily agree to that, but he's been very accommodating so far in this option. And losing at least 2 parking spaces.
That's true.
Okay, any other council comments, questions?
No, thank you.
So what, would we wait to hear if we get the funding and then would this come to a workshop again for
I'm hoping
discussion?
I'll
or-
hear it before the next workshop on the 29th. I'm hoping I'll hear in the next couple of weeks.
Okay,
Because
so then we
they're
can just-
pushing this, and so we basically have the price from Brightline now at $568,000. And now we're just, we're waiting to hear back from the TPA, how much funding they might have in a project that's not moving forward or has been delayed. They'll take that money, because we're coming to the end of the fiscal year, and then what the DOT can put up to supplement the cost.
Okay, so the
Yeah.
plan would be an update at July 29th workshop, so we talk about one more time before it went to council meeting. Okay.
Yeah.
All
If I
right.
could just thank Doug, he's done a lot of work on this. I mean, everything from coordinating to talking to property owner, talking to TPA multiple times. He's done just an awesome job with keeping me in the loop on this and really trying to move this forward. So thank you, Doug.
Thank you.
Thank you, Doug.
Thank you. Carrie, any cards?
No cards.
No. Any public comment? Mr. Bradford?
Yes, Doug did a good presentation for you, but cities do not give anybody anything. So why would you let this man use your property and not seek compensation? Do a lease.
I think we should. Thank you. Ask for the papers on this.
You get, just my take, he doesn't have to let us do this and we don't have a quiet zone. Or we pay may have to pay $500,000. So, there is a trade-off. His trade-off is letting us do this. So, we just have to be mindful of that. We can ask, but just know that there is a good Samaritan that he's doing as well for the rest of the village to make the quiet zone happen.
Thank you.
Okay.
Agreed.
We can talk about it again on the 29th.
But he's also getting a significant benefit too.
He's upgrading.
Well, and they want the quiet zone as well. So
That's what I mean.
I think maybe on the 29th you could have some potential options that would be reasonable for us to ask.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just an ask, not a demand.
Yeah, we'll be open to that.
Doesn't hurt to ask. Okay.
100% we don't ask.
All right. With that, can I get a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Mayor, good job keeping those
Yeah,
overlays organized.
thanks for keeping us in order.
That was,
Because I don't know if we would have had all that.
yeah, that's very,
Okay.
it almost needs somebody just following. Yeah.
I was taking notes the
I
whole
know.
time.
Yeah, same here, but there was a lot to take in.
Yeah. Thank you. I appreciate it.